Come, come, let's hear the moral story. Come, come, let's hear the moral story.
Welcome back to our 3D Storybook Explainer. Okay, let's jump right in and open the pages to a beautifully rendered, peaceful kingdom. This realm is actually ruled by none other than Snow White and Prince Florian. Now, quite a few years have passed since Snow White's legendary encounters with the seven dwarfs, and she and the prince have been doing a great job ruling their lands. But, as you can imagine, their peaceful castle was about to get a whole lot more lively when they were blessed with three very, very different daughters. So, as these princesses grew older, the king and queen faced a pretty tough question. Which of these colorful sisters is actually going to wear the crown one day? You've got the eldest, Princess Snowyella, who absolutely shines in her striking yellow gown and bright yellow hair. Then there's the middle sister, Princess Charmalina, who loves standing out in an elegant purple gown, tossing her vibrant purple and pink hair. And finally, the youngest, Princess Sweetalita. She has a much more humble vibe, looking lovely in a simple red dress with delicate light pink hair. Really, who among them is going to step up and lead? Well, it turns out their personalities were just as different as their signature styles. Honestly, Snowyella and Charmalina were a lot. They were proud, incredibly selfish, and frankly, terribly rude. They really only cared about demanding power. But Sweetalita, she was a complete contrast. Gentle, honest, kind. And she didn't just put on a polite face for the royals either. She treated literally everyone, from the heavily armored royal guards all the way down to the youngest castle servant, with the exact same gentle respect. Now, you know how selfishness works. It always finds a way to rear its ugly head. One bright afternoon, Sweetalita fairly won a simple, friendly game of crochet out in the royal gardens. Her elder sister's reaction? They furiously accused her of cheating. They marched straight into the throne room and threw a massive royal tantrum. They were literally yelling at their parents, "Mother, father, have you decided to make me queen? Give me the crown." Meanwhile, Sweetalita just entered quietly, gracefully curtsied, and politely said good afternoon. The contrast was real. Snow White, as you might guess, was absolutely not having it. She was not amused by her elder daughter's terrible behavior. Prince Florian even chimed in, pointing out they really ought to behave more like their youngest sister. When the older girls just kept complaining that Sweetalita cheated, the king and queen didn't buy a word of it. Instead, Snow White stood up and announced a royal challenge. She said, "Deep within the forest grows a golden apple upon the tallest of tall trees. Whichever princess brings it back first shall inherit the kingdom." The elder sisters just grinned. They totally thought this was going to be an easy win. There was just one ground rule from Snow White. They had to retrieve the apple themselves. But they were allowed to bring exactly one maid-in-waiting to help. And wow, did their choices set the stage for how this was going to go. Charmalina and Snowyella immediately started barking orders, rudely grabbed the eldest maids, and just stormed out. But Sweetalita? She gently approached the youngest maid and politely asked, "If it pleases you, would you accompany me?" The young maid was thrilled and happily agreed, calling it a huge honor. Okay, let's track the elder sister's progress, which was an absolute disaster right out of the gate. Literally. Barely an hour in, they hit a tall gate guarded by a dwarf who just asked for a simple toll. Instead of paying, they completely lost it, huffing, kicking, and barking like animals until they stomped away. By hour 2, instant karma. They get themselves trapped inside a massive bramble bush. Fast forward to hour 4, they finally escape and reach a sparkling lake with a sailor dwarf. But they selfishly refuse to share any dinner with him to earn a ride. So what happens by hour 6? They end up violently snapping at their poor maids, forcing them to physically drag the sisters through the freezing cold water. Meanwhile, if we look at Sweetalita's journey, it's a completely different story. When she reached that same toll dwarf and realized her pockets were empty, she didn't throw a fit. She just apologized, politely promised to repay him someday, and asked nicely to pass. And guess what? Moved by her kindness, he opened the gate. Later, at the sparkling lake, her maid spots the sailor dwarf.
Sweetalita happily offers to share their picnic lunch with him. Beaming with joy, he ferries them safely across the water. 0 freezing lake dragging required.
Eventually, all 3 sisters make it across the lake and reach their final destination, the absolute tallest tree in the entire forest. High above the branches, way out of anyone's physical reach, gleamed this magnificent, magical golden apple. This was it, the ultimate prize. The entire kingdom was hanging in the balance right here. But it begs the question, how on earth do you get a magical apple down when it's that high up and you can't climb the tree?
So this final obstacle was the ultimate test of character. Snowy Ella is pacing around in her yellow gown, complaining it's too tall. Charmalina just yells, "Then knock it down!" They literally order their maids to start bashing the tree trunk with heavy logs. Branches are shattering everywhere, which triggers a terrifying animal stampede, sending the elder sisters running away screaming. But then Sweetalita arrives, her red dress swishing. She sees this total path of destruction, feels genuinely sad, and takes a totally different approach. Following her maid's advice, they carefully clean up the broken branches and gently water the dry, thirsty vines growing at the base of the tree.
Because Sweetalita chose to nurture nature rather than just destroy it, the forest actually responded. It's like magic. Well, literally magic. The vines she watered suddenly started glowing with this vibrant, magical energy. They gently wrapped around Sweetalita, the golden light catching her beautiful red dress and light pink hair perfectly, and lifted her safely, high up into the air. Supported entirely by the magic of the forest, she reaches out and easily claims the shining golden apple.
But hold on, because the drama is definitely not over yet. Bursting back into the royal throne room in an absolute huff, Snowy Ella and Charmalina go right back to their old toxic tricks. "We demand another challenge! Sweetalita cheated!" they scream at the king and queen. They were completely unaware that right as they were throwing this second tantrum, the castle doors swung open and Sweetalita was casually walking in right behind them, holding the glowing golden apple.
The elder sisters just kept screaming that she cheated, but they were swiftly silenced when some surprise witnesses suddenly showed up in the hall. The tall dwarf steps forward and tells the king and queen, "She treated me with kindness." And right after him, the sailor dwarf pops up and adds, "She shared what little she had." Sweetalita hadn't cheated at all. Her incredible kindness had just won her all these allies, who were thrilled to testify to her amazing character. Confronted by the undeniable truth right in front of the entire royal court, the elder sisters were trembling with total embarrassment, totally busted. Unable to even look at their parents, Snowy Ella in her yellow gown and Charmalina in her purple gown just turned and fled the castle in absolute disgrace. And in a hilarious twist of pure poetic justice, they managed to wander right back out into the forest and got securely trapped inside yet another thick bramble bush. You really can't make this stuff up. Back in the Great Hall, Prince Florian proudly tells his youngest daughter that she has proven herself totally worthy. But Sweetalita, always true to her nature, just shakes her head gently. She says, "I could never have succeeded without my dear maid. She deserves the golden apple more than I do." I mean, wow. Instead of eagerly snatching up the kingdom for herself, she displays the ultimate humility and hands the magical golden apple directly over to her young maid.
But the second the young maid takes the fruit into her hands, we get this massive magical twist. The golden apple suddenly begins to glow brilliantly, right there in the middle of the throne room, in a massive swirl of sparkling 3D light. The fruit actually transforms. It turns out it wasn't just an apple at all. It shifts and expands into a breathtaking, radiant fairy. The fairy looks warmly at the youngest princess and drops this incredible truth. "Sweetalita, you are not only kind, but humble, generous, honest, and willing to share your success. These are the qualities of a true ruler." The fairy didn't just give her a verbal pat on the back either.
She lifted this shining, magnificent crown, placed it directly upon Sweetalita's light pink hair, and declared, "So rise, Queen Sweetalita," right before vanishing into thin air.
And so, Queen Sweetalita officially took the throne. Keeping perfectly true to her generous spirit, she immediately made that young maid her official royal counselor. With her gentle and honest leadership, peace once again filled the entire land. Now that feels like the perfect tidy, happily ever after, right? Well, our 3D storybook explainer doesn't quite end there. Because deep within the dark, tangled parts of the forest, the bitter elder sisters were still wandering around, desperately searching for wealthy princes and lost fortunes. One stormy evening, they stumble upon this shadowy, super creepy cottage. Inside, an old woman is stirring a bubbling cauldron. And as the sisters slowly approach, the old crone hisses this incredibly chilling threat to herself. "Snow White, I shall not spare you this time." The two sisters, completely frozen in horror, gasp, "Grandmother!" Seeing Snowy, Ella, and Charmalina standing face to face with the legendary evil queen leaves us with a truly chilling question. What wicked, dark plans does she actually have in store for these two selfish, bitter sisters? Are they about to become pawns in her ultimate revenge against Snow White? I will leave you to ponder that magical mystery. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.